Ukrainian forces have found themselves encircled in the Kursk region, but they are no strangers to such situations. Simultaneously, they are preparing to retreat from some areas of the Donbas region. Meanwhile, as demonstrated by the G20 summit, the world is increasingly indifferent to Ukraine and its problems. The situation in the Kursk region and Sumy direction. In the Sumy direction and near the border with Kursk, the Ukrainian armed forces grouping, surrounded near Oligovka, in the Olginskaya Grove of the Kursk region, has been defeated. The enemy has suffered significant losses, with an entire large unit effectively trapped in a basic encirclement. In this case, the statements from the Russian Ministry of Defense can be fully trusted. The internet is now flooded with images of what remains of the AFU's attacking group in this area. Essentially, Ukrainian tourists have lost their way in Russia. Although shocking photos from the scene are circulating, they cannot be shown here. At the same time, a missile strike by a Russian Iskander system with a cluster warhead was reported, targeting a concentration of Ukrainian equipment and personnel near the settlement of Kurakhove in the Sumy region. The Russian army seems to be systematically creating smaller encirclements in the forested areas of the Kursk foothold, eliminating these pockets while simultaneously delivering intensified artillery and missile strikes on the Sumy region. The Russian forces appear to be preparing for a major defeat of the AFU in the Kursk region. Even the Pentagon has acknowledged this, with representatives recently stating that a decisive battle is being prepared in the Kursk region. The recent US decision to allow strikes deeper into Russian territory seems to align with these developments. The Russian armed forces, in turn, remain on alert, advancing steadily, destroying enemy forces, taking very few prisoners, and preparing for an offensive into the Sumy region, which is becoming increasingly evident. Kupyansk and Oskol operations. In the Kupyansk direction, the Russian army has achieved successes, taking control of the western district of the settlement of Glushkovka. Russian forces advanced from the village of Kolesnikovka in heavy fighting. Meanwhile, the Oskol operation continues, with Russian forces advancing north and south along the Oskol River. Despite Ukrainian propaganda claims, Russian paratroopers are reportedly fighting within Kupyansk itself. They are currently near the city center, attempting to consolidate their positions. Attempts by Ukrainian forces to drive Russian troops out of Kupyansk appear futile. Ukrainian forces may try to counterattack to regain control of Glushkovka, but so far all such attempts have failed, a pattern seen along the entire front line. Overall, Ukrainian forces are struggling not only with counteroffensives, but even with basic counterattacks and defense. This indicates a catastrophic decline in the morale of the Ukrainian forces. Chasiv Yar and the Donbas front. In the Chasiv Yar direction, also known as the Bakhmut or Artemivsk direction, Russian forces have broken through Ukrainian defenses within Chasiv Yar itself and are now fighting for the refractory plant, essentially the town's main stronghold. Chasiv Yar is the key height in the Donbas region, and this advance by Russian forces has caught the Ukrainian command by surprise. Russian troops have also approached the Avangard Stadium in the city center, indicating they are now in the heart of Chasiv Yar. Just 2 weeks ago, fighting was confined to the outskirts, but the Novo and Oktyabrski districts are now close to falling under Russian control. Ukrainian sources estimate that Russian forces already control over a third of Chasiv Yar. Once the Russians secured a foothold on the outskirts, their advance gained momentum. Even Ukrainian combatants acknowledge these developments. A militant with the pseudonym Muchnoy, likely a reference to a flower worm, has written about the successes of Russian forces in Chasiv Yar. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian command has confirmed intensifying battles in the city. According to the Ukrainian military spokesperson Bobovnikova, Russian forces are amassing strength in Chasiv Yar for a decisive breakthrough to seize the city in one swift strike. However, the battle for Chasiv Yar is expected to be challenging, as the terrain consists of continuous high ground. Toretsk direction. In the Toretsk, Dzerzhinsk direction, Russian forces are continuously assaulting the city and advancing into its elevated central areas. Ukrainian militants have also reported that Russian forces are gradually encircling the central spoil heap, which is the cornerstone of Ukrainian defenses in Toretsk. Let us note that at the moment, the Ukrainian Armed Forces, AAFU, still confidently control about a third of the urban area in Toretsk. Ukraine recently launched ATACMS missiles at Russia, as I had predicted earlier. The attack achieved nothing. Specifically, 5 ATACMS missiles were intercepted during an attack on the Bryansk region a few days ago. A sixth missile, the last one, so 6 ATACMS in total, was damaged and ultimately fell on a military facility, presumably a warehouse. However, there were no secondary explosions, only a small fire, and no casualties were reported. If there had been casualties, we would have quickly heard about them, as was the case with ATACMS strikes in Crimea during the summer, if anyone remembers. As previously predicted, this decision to use these missiles has led to no significant results. Based on the Russian Ministry of Defense's reports about this missile strike, it's worth highlighting the following key points. Choice of the Bryansk direction. 1. The decision by the AFU command to target Bryansk was not random. By analyzing data on intercepted fixed-wing drones since early September, it becomes evident that Bryansk stands out among other directions. The reason for this phenomenon is quite simple. In all other directions, the Russian armed forces have already established layered air defense systems. These systems provide coverage for both ground forces and logistical rear areas, making it extremely difficult to breach them, whether using large drones, subsonic cruise missiles, or even ATACMS missiles. 2. Russian air defense superiority. The complexity of breaking through this defense means that significant operations involving large forces and high losses are required. This is also why F-16s are not being brought to the front line. They are kept deep in Ukraine's rear and do not participate in active combat. The reason is Russia's powerful and long-range air defense systems, which effectively deny such aircraft access. Third, Bryansk as the weak link. The Bryansk direction, therefore, was seen as the weakest link. It was considered more advantageous both tactically and economically. This suggests that the AFU command is conserving its long-range missiles and carefully deploying them where success seems more likely. However, even here, the results were negligible. In conclusion, while the AFU command tries to preserve and strategically use its limited stock of long-range missiles, the effectiveness of such attempts remains highly questionable in the face of Russia's well-established air defenses. However, if they lose the spoil heaps, they will have virtually no chance of holding even these positions. Therefore, the fall of Toretsk is likely only a matter of time. Previously, the 12th Special Forces Brigade of the AFU, Azov, a group banned in Russia, was redeployed here in an attempt to stabilize the front. While they managed to achieve some stabilization, it was only temporary. Reports suggest they suffered losses and were subsequently relocated to Chasiv Yar. It remains to be seen how they will fare there. Pokrovsk direction. Russian forces are advancing near the settlement of Petrovka and toward the settlement of Dakinska. Additionally, the Russian armed forces have progressed about a kilometer and secured new positions in the northern encirclement of Selidov, near Petrovka itself. Ukrainian forces are trying to halt the Russian offensive, actively engaging in counter-battery combat. However, as evident from the pace of the Russian advance, these efforts are proving ineffective. It should be noted that the AFU continues to redeploy any available reserves to the Pokrovsk direction, but these efforts have yielded no results. Something fundamental appears to have changed in the Ukrainian army, and this is evident from the ineffectiveness of its attempts to counter the Russian offensive. These Ukrainian actions, aimed at hindering Russia's advance, remain fruitless for now. Meanwhile, the Russian command seems to be methodically preparing for the storming of Pokrovsk, considered the primary objective of Russia's offensive in Donbas. Kurakhove direction. The Kurakhove direction has become the most successful area for Russian forces at present. After advancing near the settlement of Berestki and posing a direct threat to Starie Turny, the AFU redeployed additional reserves to this sector. However, these reinforcements do not consist of well-trained, Western-trained brigades from the Kursk foothold. Instead, they are scraping together various depleted brigades from the Zaporizhzhia and Kherson directions, as well as territorial defense units, including personnel from Ukraine's far western regions. Many of these territorial defenders were promised they would never be sent to Donbas and would only engage in local defense tasks. Instead, they are now being deployed to try and prevent the Kurakhove pocket from closing, and their prospects appear bleak. Furthermore, forced conscription remains widespread in Ukraine, with many forcibly mobilized men reportedly being sent directly to Kurakhove. This area is where the Ukrainian army is suffering its greatest losses, not just in territory, but in manpower. Deteriorating situation in the north. The situation for Ukraine is also worsening northward. Russian forces are pushing the Ukrainian army out of positions north of the settlement of Zarya and are continuing their advance toward Pushkin and Ukrenka. In Kurakhove itself, the Russian armed forces are applying relentless pressure. Soon, Russian troops may set foot in the city center. If that happens, the loss of Kurakhove will become only a matter of time, likely before the end of the year. Missile stockpile and energy infrastructure strikes. According to Western intelligence, Russia has amassed around 300 Kh-101 cruise missiles, some of which were used in recent large-scale strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, among the most extensive since the start of the conflict. It is clear that these strikes will not be the last. Last winter, Russia avoided targeting energy infrastructure during the coldest months, likely to avoid escalating tensions further. Such strikes were instead carried out in spring and autumn to avoid accusations of terrorizing civilians. However, the current situation shows that Russia is no longer hesitant to strike during the colder months. With all red lines crossed, it is evident that the Russian army is now prepared to fight with an unprecedented intensity, and its missile forces are ready to strike relentlessly. Friends, I have a serious question for you. Do you think Russia should respond using, let's say, more direct methods of applying pressure on our Western partners? Write a plus if you believe yes, that you're ready for such escalation, or a if you think no, we don't need a third world war, and caution is the better path. I'm very curious and look forward to your answers.